Not only did the North Vietnamese make it clear to us that this question of the pilots going home by a non-military plane was important, but they made it clear to the pilots. And I recall that when we suggested that the people in Washington making this decision had not been to North Vietnam recently or not recently, they had not talked with the North Vietnamese, and that perhaps we and the pilots knew something about the North Vietnamese attitude which they did not know. Whereupon the ambassador came back with, I thought, a marvelous answer. He said that one of the persons in Washington making this decision was a man who had survived a Japanese prison camp and had come out of it weighing 97 pounds, period. At which point Father Berrigan said, "These men don't weigh 97 pounds. I don't see the analogy."
In fact, Father Berrigan and I, on our way back, this may seem presumptuous on our part, but on our way back from Paris, we sent a wire, I think with our last $15, to the White House, saying something like, "We'd like to talk to you, President Johnson. You know, would you please meet with us? We just come back from Hanoi. We've just talked with the Premier Pham Van Dong. We just read in the newspaper that you say the North Vietnamese are not ready to negotiate. What we learned from Pham Van Dong seems to contradict that. We'd like to talk with you about this and about the prisoner release, which we think has been mishandled, but we have not so far received an answer from LBJ. At this day. Yeah.
I know many people have said, look, we've killed innocent people. Our bombs have killed civilians and babies and mothers. And I suppose there is truth to that. There have been people that have been killed. But your government has not bombed civilians. Your government has not bombed open cities. Your government has sent its bombers in after targets, military targets, that have been placed in an area surrounded by civilians.
I was in North Vietnam during the war, and I saw the effects of these cluster bombs on little kids, and little round bombs that contain hundreds and hundreds of steel pellets. And when the bomb explodes, these pellets shoot out, and they enter the bodies of people, and almost all civilians, just farmers and their families, and then they're very, very hard surgically to get out.
One of the strangest things that happened was we were very interested in knowing how the Vietnamese withstood this bombing. And so far to the north of Hanoi, they took us to a mountain that had caves in it where they had fought against the Chinese and the Japanese and the French before the Americans. And it was like an underground world, kind of the kind of thing that you would see in a Star Wars movie now. And so we had a dinner and a meeting in this cave. It was the size of a basketball auditorium. And then the thing that the Vietnamese always do is they all get up and sing songs about their struggle or traditional songs of the country. And then whether you can sing or not, they ask you to stand up and sing. So Howard sang America the Beautiful.
Domino theory is one of those great pieces of nonsense which the administration keeps uttering, and which any student of international affairs, I think, can demolish in a very short time. How did Vietnam fall? If Vietnam is about to fall, did it fall because of something that came from abroad? It fell because of internal conditions, or it's falling because of internal conditions in Vietnam. The best way to make sure that a country turns to communism is to put foreign military forces in it, because then the communists will have a nationalist cause which they can use against the foreign power.
And when his book came out, I think 1966 or so, there wasn't a, it was so inconsistent with the drift of thinking and understanding that most people couldn't even read it. They couldn't read the words.
Vietnam, it seems, has become a theater of the absurd. Early in 1966, a new pacification technique was developed by American soldiers. It involved surrounding a village, killing as many young men as could be found, and then taking away the women and children by helicopter. The Americans called this procedure Operation County Fair.
I was very conscious of the role of the historian and how a historian who didn't use her knowledge to play some role in what was the most serious issue before the nation was somebody who was neglecting his or her duty to education, to students.
My first encounter with Howard was literally my first day as a freshman at BU. I arrived there, and almost immediately hundreds of students, swarmed into the Marsh Chapel and provided a sanctuary for a soldier who had gone AWOL from a military base near Boston. He'd been given orders to ship out to Vietnam. He came to BU and, was immediately supported by people there. It was a 24-hour day, teach-in, really. It was music, people bringing in food, people speaking around the clock. And Howard probably spoke a half a dozen times during that week, and it was very inspiring to me. I mean, he was spellbinding and making connections between the war and civil disobedience, the history of war during the 20th century, his own experience as a bombing pilot in World War II. And I'd never seen anything like it before.
Students were expected to be quiet and live in the dormitory and be supported by mom and dad and take classes and do as they're told. Then along came the 60s and people like Zinn and the students of my generation. And all of a sudden we were getting involved in issues right there on the campus that had been considered outside of our purview completely.
That's what they mean when they say the 60s ruined education. That is, there was this incredible life that suddenly came into the universities as the world entered the university and the university entered the world.
Eventually, Boston University did become a hot point of student protest against the war. And the hotter it got, the more we depended on Howard Zinn to support us, because while other faculty members thought that sometimes we'd gone too far, Zinn was always right there, indeed, backing us up and giving us the intellectual justification for our points of view.
So now this guy is trying to get tenure at Boston University. And looks like, I think he didn't get it one time, and this is a second time around. All it needs is the vote of the trustees. So the students come to him and ask him to speak against the war, and he doesn't really connect the two things. He said, well, sure, because if you were in Howard's position, you always said sure. And then it gets a little closer, and you say, well, where is this going to be? And they say, well, right outside the such-and-such hotel, because we're trying to speak to the trustees. And it begins to dawn on, oh, now wait a minute. These are the same trustees that on that same day are going to be voting on my tenure. And then he says, and who else will be speaking? Oh, you're the only one. And he says, yes, I'll speak. And by the time he speaks, the trustees have voted. Who knows what would have happened had the chronology been otherwise, but that's how it came down.
Nonviolence does not mean acceptance, but resistance.